another day here. We're gonna start double checking all of these doors. Yesterday I cut them all down. We routed all the doors, but I wanna just double check one last time that these measurements and the measurements that we get from the doors are the same. Once I measure all the doors, we input them into a computer. It formulates all the math for us, and then we can build all the doors. And once in a while, if you're not careful, you can input it wrong on the computer, which then will do the math, and the math will be incorrect for the door size. So we just want to try to catch that and eliminate any mistake that we can. Not that it'll be perfect, because if I measure the door incorrectly at the beginning, that's an issue, but we just want to try to eliminate any dumb issue just from human error, from the computer, inputting, all of that type of stuff, so that hopefully everything will turn out perfect for the client. All right, so now we have all the doors measured. They're all arranged from biggest to smallest, which will make things easier later. So now we need to start sanding. We are going to be using 2 sanders to sand these doors. This first one is the small battery-powered Milwaukee. It's super small, so I'm able to get into any small area on the door that I need to. I won't have to use this sander much, but it's there if I need it. The next sander is just this normal palm sander from DeWalt. We're going to be using this 150 grit Diablo sandpaper. I think it's the best sandpaper. It does a really good job, and it lasts a long time where some of the other brands don't. So we're going to be using that, and we just have to make sure the door is flat. We want to make sure there's no burn or machine marks, so that way when we stain it, everything will look consistent. One thing that is super important to do when you're sanding is to make sure you sand with the grain. So up here, we'll go up and down, and then here, we'll go left to right, up and down. That way then you don't see any inconsistencies when you're staining. The other thing we're doing is for the sandpaper, since these are stain doors, we're only using 150 grit, because if you use anything above that, it seals the pores off and the stain can't penetrate, and it will make it look blotchy or uneven. Where on our painted doors, we'll go up to 220 and it'll just give a smoother finish, and it'll kind of knock the grain down. On the painted doors, we like to use beech wood, which has a tight grain and you never see it. But on the stained doors, we very rarely use beech wood. People usually go red oak, white oak, maple, cherry. So we just don't want to go above the 150 on the stained doors. That way then the stain can be even and it'll all look super good. Here's a look at all the notes for that cabinet job. These are all the notes for the cabinet shells that got inputted into the CNC right over there. CNC cut everything out. We also built the face frames off of that, installed everything there. Then these are like the notes for different things that we need to build for the job, along with all the doors, and then the drawer boxes. We just have to follow all of this master plan, build everything, everything should fit. Alrighty, so we're going to bore the doors with this boring machine and these hinges right here. Again, these are all Bloom hinges, just like the slides. I think they're the best. They're all various different sizes. We have more hinges down there, and all different sizes depending on what size the door needs. When I measured the doors, I just figured that out. All the doors, or most of the doors, will be measured. The hinge will be 3.5 from the top or 3.5 from the bottom. Except down here on the notes, I specified some of the doors need to be a little bit different, whether there's a drawer box in there or there's just varying things. Some of the doors are super small, so 3.5 wouldn't work. So yeah, let's get to boring. The first thing I do is I measure the door, and figure out which number it is, so that way then I don't make a mistake and not follow my notes down here. There's 2 doors for the pan divider cabinet that the hinge needs to go towards the middle a little bit to account for that 1/2 inch material I put in the bottom and the top. There's 4 doors here that are smaller, so the hinge needs to be a little bit wider, so that way then it'll fit inside of there. And then there's 4 doors here that are taller. Anything above 32, 33 inches in height, I had 3 hinges just to give it a little bit more stability. So we're going to come over here. We're going to push the door up tight on the back rail here, and then over to the side here where my marks are at 3.5. And then the leg will stabilize the door, and then it'll bore it. Then all we have to do is unscrew the hinges, put them in the baggies, and then keep going on the next pile. Once the hinges are in the door, you just unscrew the hinges, and then we'll put them in baggies, take them to the job. Once everything's ready and finished and we're ready to install the doors, we'll just read the sheet and it'll tell us exactly where the door goes and what hinge size needs to go on there. But putting the hinges in the door beforehand allows us to do is we don't have to use a rubber mallet to hammer the hinges in, which I don't like doing on clients' countertops. We've never had a problem with it, but if it's a brand new countertop, I don't want to be using a mallet and hammering things on their countertop. All we have to do to put them in is simply press it and then take the screw, screw the screw in just like that. And then that hinge will be done. We don't have to be fearful of using a rubber mallet and hammering to put the hinge in, which once in a while, it never happened a lot, but once in a while you get a hairline crack right here, then you have to remake the door. But by doing it like this ahead of time, you don't have to worry about that. Now on my notes right here, door 7, 8, 13, and 14, this is one of the doors. The hinge needs to be centered at 3.5 from the top and the bottom instead of 3.5, and that's because the door is so narrow. I don't want the hinges too close together here in the middle, otherwise it doesn't operate as well. So all I do is I measure down or measure up 3 inches, and then I'll line the hinge up with this 0 mark right here, and then I'll simply bore the door. It's a little more complicated than just simply butting it up to here and here for the 3.5, and I could adjust those to 3 inches, but this is pretty simple. Just measure whatever you need, bore the door, put the hinge in. Now as you can tell here, if I had done 3.5 like a normal door, the bores would have been very, very tight. I don't like going any less than 3 because you have 1.5 inches of face frame. The hinge sticks down a little bit and I don't want to get too close. 3 inches works perfectly, so that's just what I do. Now on these taller doors, they're 40 1/4 tall. I'm going to do 3 hinges, so the top is 3.5 like normal, the bottom is 3.5 like normal, but the middle, all I do is I just take 40 1/4, divide that by 2, get 20 1/8, and that's where I'll put my hinge. And then when we install the cabinets, I'll make sure there's no screws in the face frame or any shelves in the way. This just makes it simple. And the hardest part, or the hardest time to bore, is when your hinges aren't even on a pair of doors, because then you have to remember which side is the right, which side is the left door. And if you don't remember that, it's a problem. So all I do to make it simple is I keep everything the same on doors that I can, and it'll make it go faster, and you won't have any problems. Sometimes clients will have us put a pull-out box in the bottom of this lower cabinet right here. And in that case, what I do to make the box as wide as possible, some places do it differently, but I want the box as wide as possible, and I don't want to put spacers in here. So I raise the bottom bore holes up 8 or 9 inches. And this is where it's a little bit harder, because you have to remember which side is the left door, which side is the right door, and where the bottom of the door is to pull off of that correctly. Because if you pull off the bottom of the left door, but it should have been the right door, the borehole will be down 8 or 9 inches on that door, and it would be wrong. So we have to do that quite a bit, but I try to avoid that as much as possible because I don't want to create a problem that doesn't need to be there. We have all the doors bored up. We just have to package those. These ones are already packaged up. They're all bored already. They're going to get sent over to our other facility. And then over there, they'll get all custom stained, clear coated, sent through the oven, and be ready for install.